For children across the country trapped in failing school districts, this is the season gather around their computers to wait and pray for a name to appear. The room is still. Parents sit quietly with bated breath. They know the next few minutes could have a profound impact on the course of their children's lives. A name appears and happiness erupts. A lucky winner has been picked. With the good fortune comes the opportunity for a student to escape an abysmal traditional public school and enroll at a school that meets his or her individual needs. This is the story of our nation's charter school lotteries. The joy in a parent's heart is when their child is accepted at one of the most foremost reasons that I support charter schools. I also recognize there's a flip side to this story. Charter schools have limited seats in the lottery system, while fare does not pan out for every family. For the smiles, there are tears. This is a sad reality, but it isn't an argument against these schools. On the contrary, it's an argument for expanding charter school access so that every child can receive a high-quality education, no matter his or her zip code. And expand they have. Charter schools are relatively new in terms of the American education system, with the first charter issued in Minnesota in 1992. They have since ridden the school choice wave to over 8,000 communities, serving nearly 4 million students across 45 states. Furthermore, charter school growth is accelerating. Enrollment doubled in the most recent decade, and 74% of parents would consider sending their child to a charter school if just given the chance. Charter school success is linked to thousands of success stories across the nation. As studies and testimonies emerge from the first class of charter schools, they've proven what we've all expected. Removing the educational bureaucracy is a boon to student achievement. Now, charter graduates have the chance to send their own children to charter schools, and I see it as the committee's role to give them the best possible chance to do it. So today, we will embark on a journey to learn more about where charter schools are, how are they benefiting students, and to get more information. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. Ranking member.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bean. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. As recognized by the Founding Fathers, numerous Supreme Court justices, and many state constitutions, the provisions of a free, high-quality public education to all children serves a compelling community interest. And Mr. Chairman, I see your scenario not as a case for more charter schools, but as a case for making all public schools the best they can be. You know, when we invest in education, we're investing in our future. Members of this committee should understand that children, regardless of where they live or how involved their parents are, they deserve access to high-quality public education that allows them to achieve their full potential. Now, most agree that parents should have a say in their child's learning environment, and under some circumstances, this may include well-regulated public charter schools. Well-funded, transparent, and accountable public charter schools, in some instances, may be a better fit for some students. For example, Kairos PDX is a charter school in Portland. They work to dismantle structural racism, close opportunity and achievement gaps for students of color through hands-on, culturally competent teaching. But unfortunately, charter schools are not subject to the same level of oversight and accountability as traditional public schools. And as a result, we often do not know whether charter schools will provide students with benefits and any meaningful benefits. Concerningly, in many instances, charter school schemes are another way for my colleagues across the aisle to divert taxpayer dollars and community resources from already struggling public schools. Now, we must not ignore the growing number of charter schools that are operated by for-profit corporations, located in states that have lax or even non-existent oversight. According to the Network for Public Education, more than 1,100 charter schools are now run by for-profit entities, and that's more than 14% of charter schools. Prior to the Education Department's updates to the charter school program, a 2016 audit found that charter school programs run by for-profit entities in California, Florida, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas all lacked internal guardrails that posed risks to student learning and enabled waste, fraud, and abuse of federal funds. I also have serious concerns about the effects of charter school programs on students' civil rights. Although charter schools by law are required to honor students and families' civil rights protections, such as individual education plans for students with disabilities, gray areas surrounding a school's legal status may leave them ill-equipped to provide every student with a legally required, fair, and equitable education. Studies show that charter schools are more segregated than traditional public schools. In addition, students may be rejected, unnecessarily disciplined, or expelled for reasons that would not be allowed at a traditional public school, often with few or no avenues for recourse. And then there is the issue of the number of charter schools that close, often abruptly. In fact, about 25% of charter schools close within 5 years, leaving students and families without support and sometimes without information. And often for-profit management entities are based outside the bounds of federal oversight, not really the choice parents are looking for. Yes, parents should be able to decide the best way to educate their children. However, this should not come at the expense of a strong quality public education system that protects and supports every child. That's why I ask that committee members join me in supporting more magnet schools, schools that provide choice within the public school system and that come with accountability and non-discrimination. My home district in Beaverton, Oregon, for example, offers some very popular options: an arts magnet, a science and engineering magnet, an international magnet. So instead of proposing an 80% cut to the Title I program, my colleagues should invest in public education and evidence-based choice programs so every family can send their child to a high-quality, accountable, and safe public school. So thank you to our witnesses for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8-C, our sub-C, all committee members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically. You have to use Microsoft Word format to do it by 5 p.m. after 14 days from today's hearing, which is March 20th, 2024. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days after the date of this hearing to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I note for the record, the subcommittee, that some of our colleagues who are not permanent members of the committee may be waiving on for the purpose of today's hearing. And now, I know you're wondering, how does our committee staff find foremost experts in the field? But once again, they've done so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Julian Vasquez-Heilig is a founding board member of the Network for Public Education and an academic whose research focuses on K-12 education practices that impact equity and innovation. He previously served on the executive committee and as education chair for both Kentucky and California NAACP. Dr. Vasquez-Heilig received his PhD in educational administration and policy analysis and a master's degree in sociology from Stanford University. Kind of West Coast heavy here so far. He's also earned a master's degree in higher education and a bachelor's degree in history and psychology from the University of Michigan. Go Wolverines. Welcome, Dr. Vasquez-Heilig.
All right. Dr. Heilig, thank you for coming today, and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm honored to contribute to this critical discussion on school choice, sharing insights from my multifaceted engagement with the charter school sector as a former charter school educator, donor, parent, board member, and now researcher. These experiences, combined with my academic inquiry, have provided me with a deep understanding of the nuances and complexities surrounding charter schools. In the late 1990s, my research into charter schools began in Michigan, a state at the forefront of the charter school movement. This journey continued through an instructional role at the Aspire Charter School in East Palo Alto, California, and as a board member of a charter school in Austin, Texas. Witnessing my daughter's education within a charter school further personalized my insights into the sector's impact on students and families. As a researcher and tenured scholar, I have published 28 peer-reviewed articles, reports, and law reviews and other publications on school choice. The foundational premise of charter schools was to foster innovation and provide an alternative that would spur improvements within the traditional public school system. Yet, the body of peer-reviewed academic research, including my own studies, increasingly questions the efficacy of charter schools in delivering on these promises. Data from the NCES indicates no significant academic advantage for charter school students over their public school counterparts. Furthermore, Credo series of ongoing reports have sometimes noted positive achievement results and other times they found negative results, often into hundreds of a standard deviation. Credo has also faced criticism for the methodology from the National Education Policy Center and the Network for Public Education, casting doubt on the significance and replicability of their days of learning framing of their findings. Beyond the question of academic outcomes, charter schools have been shown to exacerbate pre-existing challenges within the public education system. As noted by the 2016 resolution from the NAACP that came forward when I served as NAACP Education Chair in California, charter schools on average exhibit higher rates of teacher turnover, decreased teacher quality, serve less special needs students, and intensified racial segregation, and have exhibited inequitable disciplinary practices. The work of such scholars such as Kevin Wellner, among others, have illuminated how charter schools' selective recruitment and retention practices contribute to a deepening of educational disparities. My own research corroborates these findings, highlighting the troubling extent of racial segregation in charter schools and challenging the inclusivity and equity of the choice model. So here's the flip side. The issue of accountability or lack thereof in the charter sector is particularly alarming. The absence of rigorous oversight in many states has paved the way for financial mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and a disturbingly high rate of school closures. A recent study by NPE found that over 25% of charter schools close within 5 years. By year 10, the closure rate was 40%. Millions in public funds from the Department of Education have been spent on charter schools that either never opened after receiving those grants or closed within a year. These dynamics not only disrupt students' educational paths, but have resulted in documented misallocation of billions of dollars in public funds. The governance structure of many charter schools, especially those managed by for-profit entities, often fail to align with the broader community interests where they are located, undermining the principle of public accountability in education. Moreover, the unchecked expansion of the charter sector poses significant risk to the public education system because it dilutes resources and exacerbates the challenges of delivering a high-quality education in all sectors. The problem is accentuated by the expected nationwide decline of K-12 student populations in public schools, underscoring the urgency of focusing our efforts on improving existing infrastructure rather than expanding the charter sector indiscriminately. Given these concerns, my stance on charter schools has evolved towards a more cautious and critical perspective. While most have heard the original idea that charter schools would serve as laboratories for educational innovation and provide families with diverse options, it's imperative that we address the profound existing issues of accountability and financial management that currently beset the school choice movement. In consideration of the predominant perspective of educational research data, it is imperative that we unite in advocating for strategic reassessment of the charter school model, with a focus on upholding educational excellence, reinforcing our value of education as a public good, and enhancing communities' involvement in charter schools. Only through a concerted effort to confront and resolve these challenges can we ensure that charter schools will instead contribute positively rather than negatively to our collective goal of an effective education system for all students. It's my sincere hope that this testimony serves as a catalyst for thoughtful and comprehensive reevaluation of charter school landscape. I don't mean to be the skunk at the garden party, but may it ignite initiatives and policies aligned with our highest educational aspirations, guaranteeing every child access to a high-quality education that is emblematic of our nation's dedication to excellence in education for all children and families. Thank you for considering these perspectives on this critical issue.
Dr. Heilig, well done. Thank you very much. And I was following along because you have submitted your written testimony earlier. I now yield the floor to Ranking Member Bonamici for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I'd like to start by reiterating that research on charter schools is mixed at best when it comes to determining their effectiveness at providing high-quality academic instruction for students. And additionally, research has shown that charter schools are less likely than traditional public schools to enroll and support students with disabilities, more likely to be segregated by race, socioeconomic status, class, and student language proficiency. I think, Dr. Raymond, you made a great case for a longer school year. Mr. Padicio, you certainly made a case for more professional development and differentiation, a great case for smaller class sizes and more engaged administration. But I see our role as policymakers to care about all students, not just with those students with the parents who say, okay, well, we want to find a right fit for our students, because you still have to look at everybody and give everybody a great education. So when I was in the Oregon legislature, I was on a charter review commission where we looked at, it was 10 years after our charter law passed, and we were grappling with issues back then. This was maybe 12, 15 years ago. A lot of questions that still haven't been answered today. How are charter schools determining which students enroll? Who serves on boards? To whom are they accountable? What happens when charter schools close? Where do their students go? We had a lot of questions about the proliferation of online charter schools, which tend to have an abysmal record. So Dr. Vasquez-Heilig, you mentioned the lack of accountability and rigorous oversight of charter schools in many states, and also the high percentage of schools that close. So what do students and families do when their charter school closes its doors? What recourse is there? What options do they have? If a charter school closes in the middle of an academic year, how does that affect the local public schools?
Yeah, so I have to work in an example about the University of Michigan. So I can want to go to the University of Michigan, but the University of Michigan also wants to have me too. And I think that's one of the issues that we have with charter schools is we talk about lotteries and these types of things, but the charter schools get to decide who's eligible for that lottery in a lot of cases, right? And if those students leave, then they're able to backfill those students and they can decide how they want to backfill students when students leave, et cetera. And so when charter schools close, we know that public schools are going to welcome them back because public schools are a part of education as a public good. And so they're going to bring any student that comes to their door, they're going to allow them in. And so we have to understand the school choice doesn't mean that parents can willy-nilly choose the school they want to go to. They also have to be chosen by that school. And it's the same premise for vouchers too. So whether it's charters or vouchers, school choice means that the schools have a role in that choice. And so if a charter school is closed, and we know that quite a few charter schools do close, I gave those numbers in my opening statement, that disrupts their education, that disrupts their families. And so those students are welcomed back with open arms to their public schools. But they do also have a lot of other opportunities for choice. Many districts have in-district charters. Those are community-engaged charters. There's magnet schools. There's community schools. Right. There's a lot of community-driven choice.
Thank you. I'm going to get another question in. So like many other states, Oregon's witnessed a proliferation of online charter schools, as I mentioned. In 2015, a Credo report about online charter schools found such poor performance that Education Week actually quoted Dr. Raymond as saying it was literally as though the student did not go to school for the entire year. So despite this enrollment, we know that they've long been some of the worst performing schools in the charter sector. There was a rise, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2022 GAO report found that virtual charter schools had significantly lower proficiency rates on state tests compared with other school types. So what are the long-term outcomes for students who attend these schools, and what, if anything, can we do to hold online charter schools accountable for poor performance?
Right. So I think that Credo has been very consistent in finding that the online charters perform especially poorly, especially in math, that they've been performing very poorly. And when I was in California as education chair, this was something that California was tackling. And so this is one of the biggest challenges in the charter sector. And I think it's in the best interest of the charter sector to support accountability, because then their numbers would look better than hundreds of standard deviation of improvement. So I think it's in their best interest for the good apples to call it the bad apples.
I appreciate that. And
can I clarify
I want to know
the
if there's
record?
some. Go ahead, Dr. Raymond.
So the numbers that you've quoted are accurate, but of just a few weeks ago, our team, in part led by Dr. Lee behind me, published a policy brief about online charter schools. I would be happy to enter that into the record during the follow-on period. And what we found is that in most online charter schools, while the average performance is bad, and that's certainly the case, there are in every school a substantial proportion of students who do well. And the problem that I see now in this additional insight is that online schools are not for every student. They don't have the necessary clearing and matching.
I have to reclaim my time. There are also significant equity issues for students who don't have a parent or someone at home with them. Mr. Chairman, as I yield back, I want to enter into the record a letter by the National Network for Public Education about charter schools, and enter into the record as well a report by the National Council on Disability entitled Choice and Vouchers Implications for Students with Disabilities.
Without objection, so ordered. Thank
Yield
you very much, Ranking Member. We'll now yield to the state of Michigan, where Representative Lisa McLean is recognized for her 5 minutes. Representative McLean, you're recognized.
Thank you. And before I get started, Ms. Raymond, did you want to finish your thought?
I was done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll start just with a general question to Mr. Heilig. Because we've talked a lot about charter schools and what happens if they close, and we're all concerned about that, right? Goodness gracious, what happens if they close in the middle of a school year, right? We want to make sure that we're protecting the children. What happens when a public school fails?
Well, that's a good question. How do you define failing, Congresswoman?
Same way we define failure for charter schools.
Well, I'm
what
gonna-
happens, it's real simple. One, do you have a determination whether a public school is failing, yes or no? Yes, you do?
Well, I was asked to do that work for Rod Page when I worked in Houston. Did you want me to say more on that or just leave it?
I'm just asking, do we have a measurement for when a public school fails? Yes, we do, no, we don't.
Bureaucrats do create arbitrary measures for failing schools.
So
yes.
yes, we have that measure for when public schools fail?
Yes, bureaucrats
Thank
do
you.
create
Okay,
that
yes.
line. Yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. So what happens to a public school when it fails?
Well, we should make investments in the
I'm not
things.
asking what should, I'm asking, when a public school fails, what happens?
Well, I can tell you what happens in Texas. In Houston, they've gone and taken away the schools from the community. That's what's happening in Houston. But I think that we need to make investments in the things that we know matter.
I understand. When a public school fails, this is where I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Sure.
We have two separate sets of rules for the same children, which is kind of interesting to me.
Okay.
If a charter school fails, we have all these rules and regulations and it closes, right? And if a public school fails with less rules, less regulations, we just want more money to fix the problem. So if money is the answer for public schools, why wouldn't we give money to the answer for charter schools?
Let's go to the great state of Connecticut, where Representative Hayes is recognized. You're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I just want to make a few corrections to the record before I get into my remarks. First of all, teaching virtually is a skill set. So this idea that people turned on their computers and were aghast by what they saw, many of our educators had never had the investments made in what it takes to teach students virtually, which is a different skill set. So for that to be the metric of evaluation for what is happening in our public schools is just wrong and inaccurate. Also, I'm not sure where in the country a teacher would only be evaluated 2 times in 5 years. Teacher evaluations are part of our school systems. I was evaluated every year, multiple times a year, on things like student learning objectives, standards-based observations, parent and peer feedback, whole school measures, and also student feedback. You cannot advance as a teacher and maintain your certification without evaluation. So that needs to be said. And there is already a partnership in place between parents and teachers. I have to shout out from my own home state of Connecticut, our PTA chairman, Joe Accomando, who is here in the galley today listening. Listen, I'm an educator, and I support school choice. And I support high-quality public charter schools. They are no exceptions. But I also recognize the importance of specialized learning, schools with a focus on a particular strand or a topic, because these schools can engage students in a very different way and help them to excel in their learning. But charter schools get to pick and choose if and when they will accept a special education population. They get to choose to exclude students based on disciplinary or attendance issues. Public schools cannot do that. We have to support all students, no matter what they bring to the table. Even the kids who have no one else advocating for them, even, to your point, the Tiffanys. That is our job, to support all students. So why then are we not talking about making all schools the best that they can be, instead of picking off and creating subsets where a select handpicked group of students have access to high-quality specialized learning? As a parent, I would expect that for my child, and I want that as a teacher for every child. So that should be our response. And I also do not support moving public funds from students who need it most to fund for-profit charter networks. The Department of Education invests millions of dollars in charter schools, so we must have transparency and oversight of these funds, and that is not unreasonable. And to my colleague's point, these are questions that for a decade still have not been answered. So Dr. Vasquez-Helig, in your testimony, you mentioned that charter schools have higher rates of teacher turnover and lower teacher quality than traditional public schools. Can I ask you why public schools are able to retain quality teachers at higher rates than most public charter schools?
That's a great question, and I think that there's a lot of peer-reviewed research on this topic. Charter teachers say it's because there's a lot of inexperienced teachers in charter schools. 1/5 of public school teachers have less than 3 years experience. 1/3 of charter school teachers have that experience. They also have a challenge with experienced leaders and working conditions. So right here in DC, 25% of teachers turn over in neighborhood public schools, 40% in charter schools, according to a Washington Post piece that I recently saw. So it's very well established in the research literature, on average, because we're talking about the averages here, that charter schools have less experienced teachers and they're less qualified and they have higher turnover.
According to the Network of Public Education, over 15% of charter schools around the country are run by for-profit corporations. Do you think that a mandatory spending report or other measures by Congress would help in providing transparency to where these funds are going?
We absolutely need more accountability. There was a comment about money for these planning grants. With the CSP grant, and I've been a CSP reviewer for the U.S. Department of Education, we've seen $1 billion go into planning grants for schools that either never opened or closed after a year. There is excessive malfeasance in terms of the finances in the charter school sector.
Thank you. I don't have much time, so I will end by thanking you all for your testimony and just reminding you that investing in our teachers and in our public schools is the way that we reach all students. This idea about picking out and pulling out the most egregious statistics about failing schools should be our call to action, not us turning away from the kids who need it most or the kids who have no one but us advocating for them. With that, I yield back.
Representative Wilson, you are recognized. Good morning.
Thank you, homeboy. Thank you, Chairman Bean, Ranking Member Bonamici, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. I must state up front that I find your claims of charter schools outperforming public schools to be not only misleading, but entirely deceptive and unfounded. Charter schools have failed to uphold their promises to the communities they serve. A number of years ago, I became a public school teacher to keep the promise that traditional public schools make. My mission was clear: to provide Black and brown children with opportunities for life, knowledge, civic engagement, and the pursuit of the American dream. Charter schools fall short of this promise. Instead, poorly monitored charter schools deliver subpar academic results, snatch money from our public schools, and then wash their hands clean of any responsibility. On top of that, in my home state of Florida, we see charters exacerbate patterns of resegregation along racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. In Florida, Black students consistently perform worse in charter schools than in their traditional public schools. And while Florida's charters boast more A-rated schools, they also lead the pack in F-rated institutions compared to public schools, and that's just the reality. In fact, in 2022, a News 4 Jax report revealed that 10 out of 40 Duval County charter schools received D or F grades from the state. Does this sound consistently successful to you? Help me make sense of this. Again, the assertion that charters are best for minority, low-income communities is not just misleading, but downright dangerous and destined for failure. In a WTSP Tampa Bay report, Florida's charter school statistics paint a grim picture. A staggering 409 charter schools have shut down since the first opened in Florida in 1996. That is a 40% failure rate. So, as a former teacher and former principal myself, let's recap what we've learned. What are charter schools actually good at, if anything? We've learned that charter schools are good at snatching Florida's money that should be going to public schools, leaving them deprived. Then they peddle substandard education. And when the damage is done, they shut down and leave nothing but chaos in their wake. This is what we get with charter schools. We as a nation have worked very hard, made so many gains, and we simply cannot continue to regress into an educational landscape where we fail to keep the promises we made to our children. The very first charter school in the nation was established in my hometown of Florida, Miami, Florida, by Jeb Bush, who used that platform to win the governorship of Florida. After the school board, which I served on, passed the charter provision, despite my protest, I worked with Mr. Bush side by side to make sure that the school was at least halfway equal to our public schools. It was not, and it soon closed. Please stop diverting funds from public schools to experiment with our children. With that, I have a few questions. Dr. Vasquez, Highleg,
Yes,
data
ma'am.
is consistently showing that traditional public schools are increasing in performance over time. Meanwhile, charter schools have higher teacher turnover rates. Would it not make sense to invest in our traditional public school system rather than splintering our resources in a variety of school types?
Yes, and this is particularly important for the African American community. The NAACP has had 5 resolutions on charter schools, and the one about 2010 made exactly this point. And this is why the NAACP called for a moratorium on charter schools in 2016, and this is especially important because in urban areas, 1 in every 5 black students is now attending a charter school.
Out of time, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. Let's go to Utah, where the chair of the Higher Ed Subcommittee is recognized. Burgess Owens. Representative Owens, you are recognized.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herling, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Would you agree that, I guess what the question is, what is the priority of education, the child or the institution?
The priority of the education system should be to make the investments in our students so that they have successful futures.
Just is it the child? Is that the priority, or is the institution? Because 2 different focuses I think we're kind of dealing with right now.
Investments in the children.
Okay, child, okay. State of California, 2017, 75% of the black boys in the state of California could not pass standard reading and writing tests. Here in Baltimore, 3 districts, 0 proficiency in math. Should the parents of those children, well, let me also ask this. Would you agree the parents of these children care about their kids as much as everybody else, even though they're poor, black, Hispanic, they still care about those kids that are failing?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Would you agree that the parents of those children care about their kids as much as we do care about our kids?
Absolutely.
Okay, so in a situation where they're in these schools, should parents have a choice of leaving failing public schools to go someplace else?
So that is,
Can I just restate this? 75% of the black boys in the state of California fail to read, write, and think. Should those parents have a choice of leaving those failing public schools to go someplace where their kids have a chance to succeed?
the question you asked has limited the responses I can provide. The response to the actual question is we need to make an investment in these
Well,
children.
let me just say this. If we were talking about your child, I'm sure you would say, I want to choose someplace else. I've been hearing this for 40 years, that we need to reinvest in these schools. Guess what happens? Every 3 to 4 years, kids are graduating not understanding how to succeed as we're talking about investing more into failing schools. Should public school systems have the same level playing field in terms of the outcome as charter schools?
Well, I think that the record should say that charter schools should have the same accountability. Public schools have vastly more accountability in state law than charter schools do.
Okay, well, so why are we having so much failure across our country?
Because
this is not just California, by the way. Everywhere, and by the way, let me just say this, it's happening more in Black, Hispanic, and low-income, that this is going on.
Yes,
So,
yes, so that's the elephant in the room in our country. We know that inequality is $20 billion more go into districts that are primarily white compared to districts that are primarily Black and Latino.
well, let me say this. I know that charter schools are in the same communities as these public schools. So, and if you go to a charter school where you have a majority of Black, Hispanic, and low income, you go to the same public school charter, you're going to have the same demographics.
Yes, but here's the answer. So here's the answer to that question. So if I go into your local supermarket, and I have $10 and I have to split it 3 ways, that's completely different than if we invested in a public choice system.
Okay,
so if you have vouchers,
let me just
charters,
say this because I don't want to get into too much of the weeds. I'm going to ask, and I look at this. The problem is accentuated, this is your statement, by a nationwide decline in K through 12 student populations in public schools. That could be because parents realizing it's not working for their kids. I think we have to understand this. How about if we look at best practices? If you thought about this, you look at what's going on in Baton Rouge, you look at what's going on in this Success Academy. If those are working, should we not replicate that if the focus is our kids?
Well, I think that's a great question. You know, we have a district in Louisiana that's all charter schools, and I don't think anybody's arguing that they're a model of educational success. After Katrina, charter schools were forced on New Orleans, and nobody's arguing that they're a beacon of educational success.
No, well, we can also not argue, we have to argue that there's 75% failure rate in California. So those public schools are failing too. My point is we should have a standard for all of them. If it's failing our kids, they should not be part of the equation, right? Would you agree with that?
I agree we should have a high standard for all schools, absolutely.
Okay, that means public schools also. If public schools are failing, let's get rid of them. If charter schools are failing, let's get rid of them. Our bottom line is our output of our kids being able to sit and have these kind of conversations, to have a dream, the ability to move forward, only happens if they can read, write, and think. And for us to talk about putting down the best practices of college, of situations that are working, I'm trying to understand why that's happening. If it's succeeding, if it's in Baton Rouge, it's succeeding, New York, I go to Success Academy, upstairs in the same building is where Success Academy is, downstairs is public. The biggest disappointment are those kids and the same families. One knows they're going to be succeeding because they're part of that lottery ticket, and the other one knows they're not going to succeed because they're going downstairs to a public school system that's going to guarantee their failure. We need to focus on our outcome, focus on our kids, not the institution. And thank you guys actually for what you're doing. I appreciate particularly those in these communities that these kids have not had a chance in the past. Thank you guys so much for that. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Owens. Let's go to the great state of California, where the chair of the subcommittee of the workforce is recognized. Representative Kiley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Campbell, I want to ask you about the New Orleans experience, because it's such an important case study that in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, you had to rebuild the whole education system, and New Orleans went 100% charter. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what have the results been in terms of student achievement?
The results have been nothing short of remarkable. So as we said, it was virtually a wasteland. It was one of the worst school districts in America prior to Hurricane Katrina. And you look today and you actually see a vibrant school system. It actually works very well. And contrary to what a lot of people said, the folks who started schools after Hurricane Katrina were education leaders who were already from New Orleans. It wasn't like there was some invading force that came in with all these charter schools. The reality is we empowered local educators who were already there, already operating schools with a new way to be able to do it, that they have embraced and ran with and done phenomenal things with. Right now, if you look at our state, New Orleans, again, was always at the bottom. It's in the top tier in terms of school district performance, in the top 40%. There's no way you would have expected that in New Orleans when you look at the demographics of New Orleans. And so we have veteran educators who love New Orleans, who have lived there their entire lives, who are running great charter schools. And if you ask them to a person, they will tell you they will never go back. That's the reality of what's happening in New Orleans.
So New Orleans went from among the worst to among the best after going 100% charter.
Yes.
And yet, we see in some parts of the country, charter schools are under attack. One of the first things that the Biden administration education department did was to propose cutting charter school grants. In California, a number of laws have been passed and signed into law by the governor, making it harder to open and to reauthorize charter schools. In Los Angeles Unified School District's second largest district in the entire country, they're proposing right now to significantly restrict the ability to operate charter schools. We've heard today several just blatantly false statements about how charter schools work from our friends over there, as well as one of the Democrat witness who just blatantly mischaracterized the New Orleans experience. So what would you
State of New York, where Representative Bowman is recognized. Good morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Before I get into my questions, Dr. Vasquez-Healig, is there anything you want to clarify based on questions you may have been asked before I arrived?
I'd like to clarify, there's a lot of conversation about why Credo's results are valid. I'm really surprised that they're spending so much time trying to convince us that they're valid, which to me tells a story. Now, one of the things about being at Stanford was I was subjected to a lot of statistical torture in my graduate program, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about Credo. Our understanding of that report, and only they really know, is that less than 40% of public school students are compared to more than 90% of charter school students. So it's not really a comparison of charter schools and neighborhood public schools. It's a very, and she said carefully selected, and I want to underline selected, because it's really narrow subject groups rather than actual samples. I think that's very important to say. I don't think that we should cherry pick results about educational outcomes. Also, they note in their report that they had issues with sampling, especially for Native American students and ELL students, sub 50%, and their ability to match in those areas. Also, she talked about CMOs, and they decided to omit several states that have CMOs. Ohio, one of those, and 78% of the charters in Ohio are CMOs, and 1 of every 2 is for-profit. So I think it's important that I'm just really surprised that they spent a lot of time trying to justify their methodology, and I think that's because over the last 14 or 15 years that scholars have had lots of critiques of their methodology.
Thank you so much. As a former teacher, principal, and founder of a district-run public schools across New York City, I've also seen countless examples of the ways that charter schools can negatively impact traditional public schools and often go against the wishes of local communities. Dr. Vasquez-Healig, how do charters impact students and communities at traditional public schools, especially as it relates to things like funding, available space, and student enrollment? Can you say more about how, as you stated in your testimony, charters often fail to align with the broader community interests?
I think this is a very important point, and I was able to make it briefly to the other gentleman, because what's happening now is we are opening charters, we're offering opportunities of vouchers, et cetera, and now we're using the same educational dollars and we're funding 3 separate systems, which is a very inefficient way of going about public education. Now, we have examples from other countries. I'll give you an example of Chile. Chile is a place where they have universal choice. And what we see in those situations is that you have your great public schools in the nice neighborhoods, you have your other public schools where most of the lower achieving and low SES students go, and then you have some private schools where those voucher students go. So what these systems actually do is they promote stratification of students. You see less special ed students being served by charter schools, you see greater segregation. When we did our study in segregation, we looked at every single school in NCES. We didn't say, here's 40% of neighborhood public schools, here's 95% of charter schools. We looked at every single school in the NCES data set and found that charters are more segregated. So I think it's very important that we are attentive to these critiques. And that's where the NAACP was coming from in 2016. There are significant critiques of charter schools, and I think charter school supporters could get a lot more people on board if they would actually address the critiques, and they haven't.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and let's try to get this one in before time runs out. Can you also discuss in more detail the harsh discipline practices that exist more often in charter schools than in traditional public schools, and how these practices disproportionately impact marginalized students, including students with disabilities? Yeah. I mean, I've seen kids thrown out of charter schools. Yes. Public schools can't do that. Kids suspended for long periods of times. Public schools can't do that. Can you say more about that, please?
Yes. I think the big picture is that it really disturbs me that we spin these sort of negative aspects of charter schools, that we need to have these harsh discipline, no excuses charter schools, that it's okay that charter schools close, that it's okay that we have lower quality teachers. That's spin. But for me, as a former charter school instructor, I think of Gary. He reminded me a lot of myself, and I don't want to cry here, but he reminded me a lot of myself. He got into a little bit of trouble now and then, but one day he got into a little bit too much trouble, and the charter school kicked him out. And I came back one day and Gary wasn't there, and it broke my heart. So I just think about all the Garys out there who charter schools have decided that they don't want to serve, and they want to send them back to our neighborhood public schools.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Bowman. Let's stay with the great state of New York, where Representative Williams is recognized. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here. I'm an advocate for school choice. I believe that parents, not bureaucrats, make the best decisions for their for their kids' success and particularly for their education. In my district, we're very fortunate to have some excellent public schools, and I commend those administrators and teachers and school boards that deliver excellence in their communities. But I also have excellent charter schools, and they are usually located in the most disadvantaged communities in my district. And they are also very successful. They are wonderfully diverse. They are skillfully led, and they are in great demand. In fact, right now there are 10 families waiting on a wait list just to get into kindergarten in their community charter school. And every year they have more applicants than seats available. Dr. Vasquez-Helig, do you believe that charter schools cherry pick students to inflate positive academic results?
Well, I think that, I made a point earlier before you arrived, Congressperson.
It's a real easy question. Do you believe that charter schools cherry pick students?
They have the ability to do that, yes.
You believe they do?
They have the ability to do that if they so choose.
So you're on record for having said an option is that we can ban charter schools altogether in a September 2019 interview. Are you really considering banning all charter schools?
Well, I think that I don't think that we should ban all charter schools. I think all charter schools should be democratically accountable to the public.
Can you provide some context for me to understand your comment that an option is that we can ban charter schools altogether?
Yeah,
that sounds like banning charter schools. That's what it sounds like to me.
Great question. I don't know the context of the comment. Do you know where that comment was made?
They're your words. I assume that you meant them when you said them.
I don't know the context of the comments, but
it's always context.
But I do believe that all charters should be democratically accountable.
Okay. Isn't your whole mission really just to avoid direct competition to local public schools?
Well, I'm a scholar.
Isn't that really your mission?
Sorry. I'm a scholar, so my job is to call balls.
Scholars can have
my job is to
political
call balls
objectives.
and strikes.
Please don't interrupt me, sir. Thank you. Scholars can have political points of view, as we've all learned. I'm educated in engineering, and engineers have political opinions. And this is a very political issue. Isn't your whole mission simply to avoid direct competition to local public schools? Isn't that your mission?
No.
Let's go to the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the ranking member of the education workforce is standing by. Representative Bobby Scott, you are recognized. Good morning.
Thank you, and good morning. We've heard a lot about questions about what happens when a school is failing. Just want to remind people that we updated the law in the Every Student Succeeds Act to require that the lowest performing schools receive additional supports as a solution of addressing failing schools. Dr. Vasquez-Helig, can you say a word about what sense it makes as a solution to a failing school to let a few students slip out the back door?
Thank you so much. I'd like to answer your question and also correct the record on two places. The congressman dropped it and said that I had called for a ban, but that was related to California's ban on for-profit schools. I just did a quick Google on that. So yes, I do believe that we shouldn't have for-profit charter schools. So I want to make that clarification. I think the second thing about the New Orleans conversation, we looked at the ACT, SAT data, the NAEP data, and Louisiana RSD has been last and nearly last for quite some time. I don't believe that deserved accolades. If there are new data that I haven't seen since I published that brief, I'm very open to seeing those New Orleans data. And then finally, I think it's very important that we serve all students that come to our door. And that's what's great about public schools. Now, I understand the concerns about failing schools and the...
Well, if you have a failing school, letting a few people slip out the back door, those that have figured out what's going on, leaving everybody else in the failing school, that doesn't sound like much of a solution at all. And in fact, if you have a failing school, all of them want to choose to leave. Then what happens?
Yeah, and not every parent has the option to take their kid all the way across a city or a neighborhood to a charter school that doesn't provide transportation. There are a lot of limitations to what parents are able to do. And so it's in our best interest to have in the neighborhood a strong public school and surround...
So the solution would be to improve the school, not let a few people slip out the back door.
Yes.
Let me ask you another question. I have limited time.
Yes.
You mentioned on school choice that it's not the student but the school that's choosing, instead eligible for lottery. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been to KIPP schools where they outline who's eligible for their lottery. Now, I'm not saying that all public schools cream and crop students, and so in the research literature, you can look at Kevin Wellner's work. There's a variety of ways that students are creamed and cropped. And I won't go deeply into that, but there's well-established research on how charter schools can change their populations, which makes the analyses that CREDO do very, very difficult because it biases their selective sample.
Well, even with all that bias, some charters are obviously better than others. On average, are charters better or worse than public schools?
And I don't think that conversation can be limited to just test scores, because most of the research that CREDO does, they take very small standard deviations and the hundreds of standard deviation and create these days of learning. But we also need to look at teacher quality and teacher turnover and discipline and suspension rates. We can't just look at one outcome.
What is the effect of teacher quality, pay, and experience, turnover of teachers in charter schools?
Yeah, so we've looked at the success of teachers in terms of teacher quality. When you have a stronger teacher, it means better student achievement. There's been folks that have looked at, well, is it okay if we have great teachers come in and they leave very quickly? There's very little research that establishes that's a good idea.
Well, do charter schools have better pay, turnover, and experience for teachers, or worse than public schools?
They have worse turnover, worse teacher quality, in some cases better pay.
Can you say a brief word about the disciplinary policies? If a kid gets expelled from a charter school, where do they go?
Sure. Well, they're going to have to go back to their neighborhood public school. And charters in many states can reject students because of prior disciplinary issues.
Michi for her final thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. It's been an important discussion today. Every student deserves a high-quality education that will prepare them for success. But as we've heard, not all charter schools provide students with a quality education, and when we consider all students, nor do they deliver the same educational outcomes that our traditional public schools could. Certainly, they are not a panacea for the challenges facing students today. And as we heard, poorly regulated charter schools often have poor academic outcomes and leave students with no recourse when their rights are violated. And I want to follow up on Ranking Member Scott's comments about the conversation and the questions regarding so-called failing schools. As we know, under No Child Left Behind, a failing school was a term used to describe schools where the students had lower test scores. And as those of us who were here in 2015 and worked on the Every Student Succeeds Act, as Ranking Member Scott clarified, we ask those questions. What does that mean to have low test scores? Maybe we need to ask a question. What does that school need? Why are the students not getting higher test scores? And in fact, we changed that so that no longer are test scores used as punitive measures to label schools as failing, we put in the Every Student Succeeds Act that those schools should probably have more resources, right? Because why are the students failing? Do they need smaller classes? Is there lead in the water? Are they hungry? All those questions, where do we put the resources to help every student? So I wanted to point that out because the term failing schools is really one where we have to question a school is a building. What is happening with the students inside of it? I also want to take strong exception to the suggestion that this is about money. I find that personally offensive as a member of Congress, as someone who cares deeply about every student, to suggest that I might have questions about charter schools because of money. We care not only about the students whose parents say, wow, I need to look at a charter school option for my child. We care also about the students whose parents are maybe a single parent household. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they don't know about other options. Maybe they don't know how to get involved. And to say that we only care about this and that we want to provide a good education to those who want to leave the traditional public schools, I find to be inappropriate, and I just want to get that on the record that we should be here. We care about every student, want every student to have a good education. And calling for unchecked, expanded access to charter schools that lack meaningful accountability while continuing to underfund our already overwhelmed traditional public education system is not in the best interest of students, it's not in the best interest of parents, and it's certainly not in the best interest for the future and for our economy. So I know on my side of the aisle, we'll continue to fight for a strong quality public education system that protects and supports every child, not just those with involved parents who are looking for an alternative. We don't, as Ranking Member Scott said, we don't want to just leave everybody else behind. We need to say, what can we do to give them a great education? So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the back, and thank you. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Bonamici. Here are my 4 takeaways. One, charter schools have high levels of academic achievement, and as we've heard during this hearing, charter students, on average, learn more reading and math than their peers in traditional public schools. The fact is especially important when we know parents across the country are looking for better academic options. Number 2, charter schools are open to innovation, as Robert pointed out. Innovation is there. We've heard testimony that charter school autonomy can enable teachers to pioneer fresh teaching methods, encourage schools to develop better personnel practices, and equip schools to innovate in curriculum. All this can happen because charter schools aren't burdened by the regulations and contracts that restrict traditional public schools. 3, charter schools can provide a lifeline, as Mr. Campbell pointed out, to the most disadvantaged students. While there are some traditional public schools that provide a good education, we know that many students sometimes can be trapped when it's not the best option for them. We should keep trying to improve public schools, but we're going to try to improve charter schools too. We realize that charters can provide a vital lifeline to students where there are no other good options. Everyone benefits when families have high quality educational opportunities to choose from. And 4, I've got 3 kids. They all learn differently. Every kid is different. And so to give them just one choice, I think is not the best way to go. Everybody learns different, and maybe it's a charter school, maybe it's the public school, maybe it's a magnet school, maybe homeschooling. I don't know, but everybody's different. We recognize that, and I think that's what we recognize today. Finally, to our witnesses, let me tell you what I did. You saw me. I promised a very innovative, invigorating, robust discussion. I did set the bar high for you, but let me tell you what you did. You exceeded expectations. Thank you so much for participating. This continues, as Ranking Member Bonamici said, we will continue this conversation as we embark on a journey to make American schools the best they possibly can be. With that, there's no further...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ranking Member Scott, you are recognized.
Unanimous consent request that I enter into the record a letter from the Network for Public Education about charter schools and a report by the National Council on Disability entitled Choice and Vouchers, Implications for Students with Disabilities.
Without objection, so ordered, and thank you so much. There being no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. Members.